Mass surrenders. Sad end for Putin. Surrounded soldiers have no way out.
Russian soldiers in Haiku were surrounded by the Ukrainian army in the past days in the Kharkiv region. Fierce clashes took place between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army. These clashes resulted in the success of the Ukrainian army, although the invading questions. Troops tried every way they could not escape the sad end that awaited them. For various reasons. The Russian army, whose resistance has been broken, now faces a greater danger. Mass surrenders. The Russian forces, surrounded on all sides, had no choice but to surrender. According to Ukrainian army officials, Russian ranked soldiers and their soldiers began to surrender after the counterattack actions initiated by the Ukrainian army. A significant part of the military manpower of the Russian forces surrendered. Among the surrendered soldiers are officers of the Russian army. Especially in the Kharkov region, the Ukrainian army captured Russian troops, among which the lieutenant and colonel of the Russian army. Capturing soldiers is not only success of the Ukrainian army in Kharkiv these days. In addition, it was reported that a Su-25 attack plane, which was flying in support of Russian military ground operations in the region, was also shut down. Russian Su-25 attack aircraft tried to attack the Ukrainian army. Troops of the Ukrainian Air Defense Forces used portable anti-aircraft missile systems to neutralize the Russian warplane flying at low altitudes. Made IGLA anti-aircraft missile intercepted the jet and hit it at the same time. The cheers of the soldiers in the Ukrainian forces were heard. Then he demoralized supporters of the Russian invasion and Russian soldiers at the front by posting on social media pages. That made Russian propaganda that Ukrainian defenders shut down Su-25 SM attack aircraft in the Izium region of Haiti region in June. Soldiers of the 72nd Mechanized Bridges of the Ukrainian armed forces shut down the Russian armed forces' Su-25 attack aircraft from the Igla portable anti-aircraft missile system. Again, the pilot escaped death by injecting himself shortly before the explosion, but it was captured by Ukrainian forces. It was revealed during the interrogation that the captured pilot was a mercenary of the Wagner private military company. The Su-25 is a single-seat armored subsonic attack aircraft designed to provide buyers support to ground forces day and night in all weather conditions, with visual visibility of the target, and destroy objects in certain coordinates day and night. The Su-25 is a highly protected fighter aircraft, so Varvel systems of the Su-25 attack aircraft account for 7.2% of its normal takeoff rate. It was produced with special attention to the protection of critical elements of the cockpit and fuel system. The Polish-made Igla portable anti-aircraft missile system on which the Ukrainian army shut down the Russian Su-25 SM is designed to defeat low-flying helicopters and enemy aircraft. While the Russian forces have suffered another loss, it is useful to remind all the equipment they lost. The British intelligence agency gathered the most information about the war. In the light of this information, the British intelligence agency emphasized that Russia lost nearly 80,000 military personnel in the war in Ukraine. Besides 80,000 lost soldiers, Russia lost more than 12,000 military equipment during the war. Russia continues to suffer losses in the war, and these losses will have negative impacts on its future offensive power. In the statements made by the officials of the Ukrainian armed forces, the number of Russians lost is evaluated as 50,000. Russian forces, on the other hand, made a statement about their losses on March 25. The number they stated in this statement was 1351. This policy of non-disclosure has continued in Russian forces since 2014. Russian forces have not disclosed their military personnel lost in deportation operations since 2014. Russian President Vladimir Putin attended an economic fair held in Vladivostok, which is located very far from the Ukrainian border. The Russian leader marked the Western sanctions. He underlined that it is a very rosy future for Russia and that the country is stronger since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. U.S. National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby recently told reporters that Moscow's economic exclusion means it has to buy artillery shells from North Korea, pointing to deals for millions of shells, rockets, and artillery shells. Meanwhile, the UK's Ministry of Defense said this week that Russia is struggling to maintain its stockpile of drones. The sanctions made it difficult for Moscow to obtain vital components to replace or destroy drones. The Kremlin is reportedly purchasing drones from Iran. Both Western governments and Kyiv say Russia is suffering from serious logistical difficulties. Precision attacks with high-tech Western weapons are undermining Russia's ability to fight, and Moscow is turning to obsolete weapons as its stocks of more modern equipment run out. But the Russians left behind is a mystery, said Pierre Grasser, a researcher associated with the Sorbonne University in Paris. They had enough provisions for their original plans, but the reality is that the war is taking longer than expected and the destruction of their reserves by the U.S. made HIMARS rockets changes. VEG Moscow doesn't have many allies that can supply it or come to the aid of its manufacturers, he added, and China still refuses to go beyond the diplomatic area. As for North Korea's isolated communist regime, he said Pyongyang is likely to have a limit to what it can deliver, enough to replenish stocks for a few weeks. The chances of Russian military fatigue are much higher than Ukrainian military fatigues, said French researcher Bruno Terrace of the Strategic Research Foundation. Last week's social media accounts specializing in weapon identification detected Pakistani and Iranian artillery fired by Ukrainian artillery, suggesting that Kyiv has established multiple supply chains for its troops. But the Germany-based Institute for the World Economy IFW said last month. But the new flow of the international support for Ukraine? On the other hand, the IFWU noted that more countries are finally fulfilling their promises of faith to Kyiv. Grasser said that NATO countries provided about 1 to 2 million rounds for the 241,155mm guns they sent to Ukraine to replace the Soviet weapons that had run out of ammunition. They have been consumed 2,000 rounds a day since July, technically. Train could continue until the onset of winter, he added, but beyond that there are some questions about how much NATO can supply. Andrei Illarionov, former economic advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin, said Western aid to Ukraine was too short for what was needed to win the war and replace destroyed equipment, given the relative strength and losses of the two sides. Illarionov, who currently works for the U.S.-based Center for Security Policy, he said that during World War II, Realize really began to turn the axis back in 1943, when its expenditures outweighed those of its rivals. Military aid to Ukraine is not more than $3 billion a month. Ukraine's total expenditure plus coalition appears to be $7 billion a month, the official said, speaking at an event in Bucharest organized by the New Strategy Center think tank last week. As for Russia, different estimates have been given. Recently, between $500 million and $900 million a day, which translates to $15 billion to $27 billion a month, he added. In the war of attrition, the most important factor underlying who can win the long war is the ratio in military spending, Lariano said. In a military sense, Grasser said, the two sides are equally matched. The Ukrainians have less guns than the Russians, but they're much more accurate now. However, he noted that Moscow has access to vital raw materials for the war effort in its favor. We are entering a period of unstable equilibrium. Whoever launches a counterattack too much will likely lose the war of attrition, Grasser said.